Welcome back to the deep dive. I want you to try a little experiment with me. Imagine you are at your job. You're trying to focus on something incredibly complex. Maybe a logic puzzle that if you get it wrong has just catastrophic consequences. You need absolute focus. But about 3 feet from your head, there's a car alarm going off.
And not just going off once.
No, it goes off every 90 seconds.
Right.
For 12 hours straight. That is the soundscape we are stepping into today. We are looking at just the absolute cacophony of modern hospital telemetry.
It's a lot.
We've got a stack of sources here, from the Journal of Electrocardiology to malpractice case studies from NSO, that paint a picture that is, quite frankly, exhausting just to read about.
It really is. And the most frustrating part, you know for a fact that 99% of those car alarms you just mentioned,
Yeah.
nobody's breaking into the car. It's just noise.
That is the statistic that jumped out at me immediately. We are talking about alarm fatigue, the boy who cried wolf phenomenon, but on an industrial scale.
It's such a massive topic. And we aren't just talking about, the annoyance factor here.
Right.
We are talking about a systemic failure where our safety mechanisms they're actually creating danger.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to look at why the machines lie to us, the communication breakdown between the people watching the screens and the people treating the patients.
And what is arguably the scariest part for anyone with a license, the documentation.
Oh, absolutely.
Specifically, how do you document a mistake without destroying your career? We're going to get to that. But before we get into the weeds of the waveforms, just a quick mention that today's deep dive is brought to you by Whole Life Healthcare.
Okay, so where do we start? The noise.
Let's start with the sheer volume of this noise. I was reading through the source on harm from alarm fatigue, and I had to, double check the number.
They seem impossible, don't they?
One source noted that a single patient, just one, can generate nearly 190 audible alarms per day.
Think about that for a second. That's one alarm roughly every, 7 or 8 minutes?
From one bed.
From one bed. Now, multiply that by a 20-bed unit. You are standing in a vortex of sound.
But the stat that really creates the danger isn't the volume, it's the validity.
Right.
The research suggests that between 85 and 99% of these alarms do not require clinical intervention.
That is the crux of the issue. In any other industry, a 99% false positive rate would be considered a completely broken system.
Of course.
I mean, if your email spam filter flagged 99 of your valid emails as spam for every one actual spam message, you'd delete the software immediately.
Instantly. But in healthcare, we've just accepted this ratio as, I guess, the cost of doing business.
And that acceptance leads to the fatigue part of alarm fatigue. This isn't just nurses being lazy or, indifferent, is it?
No, absolutely not. It's biological. It's a survival mechanism. Your brain is wired to habituate to repetitive, non-threatening stimuli.
Like living next to a train track.
Exactly. Eventually, you stop hearing the train. If you didn't, you'd never sleep. You'd go insane. Yeah. The problem is, in the hospital, one of those trains is actually coming off the rails.
And we have specific cases in the notes where this desensitization turned fatal. The Boston Globe investigation. That one is particularly haunting.
It is. They highlighted a death by silence phenomenon. It wasn't that the machine didn't beep.
It's that the staff had turned the volume down or disabled the alarm entirely because they were just so overwhelmed by the false positives. They were trying to preserve their sanity, but it cost a life.
And the Joint Commission backed this up too. They issued a Sentinel event alert looking at 98 reported alarm-related events.
And the outcome ratio is just...
Yeah.
It's chilling.
80 of them resulted in death.
80 out of 98. That tells us that when the system fails, it fails catastrophically. There's no real middle ground.
So I want to understand the why. Why are these machines so bad at their job? I mean, we have self-driving cars, we have phones that can recognize my face. But why can't we get a heart monitor to tell the difference between a heartbeat and, say, a twitch?
Well, it's a mix of defensive design and just basic physics. The design part is the fear factor. Manufacturers design these algorithms to be incredibly sensitive because they are terrified of lawsuits.
Ah, okay.
They would much rather have 1,000 false alarms than miss one actual cardiac arrest.
Okay, that makes sense. Better safe than sorry, from their perspective.
But the physics part is where it gets messy. You mentioned the twitch. That's a classic example from the 10 common ECG lead placement mistakes source.
Right, they called it artifact. But explain what that actually looks like to the computer.
So imagine a patient is just, brushing their teeth. That repetitive motion of the arm creates electrical noise in the muscles of the chest. To a dumb algorithm that is just looking for a pattern, That repetitive spike looks exactly like ventricular tachycardia.
So the machine screams lethal arrhythmia, the nurse rushes in with the crash cart, and the patient is just scrubbing their molars.
Exactly. And then there's the issue of low voltage. This is a big one.
I saw that term in the notes. What does low voltage actually mean for the sensor?
Well, think about the QRS complex, that big spike on the ECG that represents the heart squeezing.
Okay.
In some patients, that electrical signal is just physically small. It's weak. Now, combine that with a dried out electrode. If the gel on that sticky pad has dried out, it increases impedance. It blocks the signal.
So the sensor is struggling to hear the heart.
Right. And if the signal drops below a certain threshold, the machine stops seeing the spike entirely.
It thinks the line is flat.
It reads asystole. Flat line, alarm goes off, panic ensues. But the patient is sitting there eating lunch.
And all of this is happening in an environment that is already deafening. I thought the study on audible alarms and workplace noise was fascinating because it talked about the signal-to-noise ratio.
This is just basic acoustics, but it drives so much of the chaos. For an alarm to be treated by the human brain as a rapid response signal, it generally needs to be about 15 to 16 decibels louder than the background noise.
But hospitals are full of vacuum cleaners, carts rolling, air conditioning, people talking.
Precisely. A busy hospital unit is loud. So to cut through that, the alarms have to be piercing. It creates an arms race of volume. The louder the unit gets, the louder the alarms have to be set to be legal, which makes the unit louder. It's a feedback loop of stress.
So we have a system that creates way too much noise and a staff that is biologically programmed to start ignoring it. To fix this, hospitals have introduced a human filter, the telemetry
A
technician.
runner watcher.
I love the analogy you used in our pre-show chat. You called them the goalies.
That's really what they are. We looked at a study that focused specifically on these dedicated watchers. Their entire job is to sit in a quiet room, stare at the screens, and basically intercept the puck before it hits the nurse.
And the data shows they are pretty good at it.
They're incredible at it. The study found that dedicated watchers intercepted 87% of alerts.
Wait, 87%?
Yes. That means 87% of the time, the machine screamed, "Problem!" The tech looked at it, realized it was a loose lead or artifact, and just cleared it. That is 87% fewer interruptions for the nurse at the bedside.
That's huge for preventing burnout. But it introduces a new problem, doesn't it? Now you have two people who need to talk to each other. The goalie has to tell the coach, the nurse, when the ball is actually in the net.
And this is where the technology gap creates a massive liability. We have a study here that felt like a battle between like the 1990s and the 2020s. Pagers versus bidirectional voice badges.
I was surprised pagers were even still in the mix, to be honest. Who uses a pager in 2026?
You would be surprised. They're still standard in so many places. But the performance difference is just night and day. The study compared how fast nurses responded when alerted by a text pager versus a voice badge where they could talk back instantly.
Give me the numbers.
With pagers, the median time to first contact, just acknowledging the issue, was 1.6 minutes.
Okay.
With voice badges,
Yeah.
0.5 minutes.
So 3 times faster. In a cardiac event, a minute is a lifetime.
See, it's brain tissue.
Yeah.
But here's the deeper insight from that study. It wasn't just about speed. It was about closing the loop.
Define that for us. What is the loop?
The loop is sender sends a message, receiver gets the message, and then the receiver confirms they have it and are acting.
Okay, makes sense.
With the pagers, only 19% of the communication loops were closed.
19%. So 81% of the time, the text sends a page saying, room 302, high heart rate, and they get crickets.
Silence. They don't know if the nurse got it. They don't know if the nurse is currently doing CPR in another room. They don't know if the pager battery died. It is a terrifying ambiguity.
Whereas with the voice badges,
Loop closure was 100%. The text says room 302. The nurse clicks and says, "I'm on my way," or "I'm busy, call the charge nurse." Ambiguity gone.
that seems like a complete no-brainer for patient safety. But looking at the forums, we pulled some threads from all nurses, it seems like the human relationship between the techs and the nurses isn't quite as smooth as the technology.
There is definitely friction. It's the telephone game problem. One comment really nailed this. If a tech sees a rhythm and says, "It looks like VTach," the nurse can't just take their word for it.
Why not? I mean, if the tech is the expert watcher.
Because the nurse is the one with the license and the liability. The nurse has to verify. But this leads to tension. Techs feel like they're shouting into the void, or that nurses get annoyed when they call. Nurses feel like they're being pestered by techs who don't understand that the patient is just scratching their chest.
Which brings us to the most dangerous assumption of all. We've talked about the machine crying wolf, but what happens when we assume the machine is smarter than we are?
The man versus machine problem. There's a tendency, especially among newer clinicians, to look at that automated text at the top of the ECG printout, where it says atrial fibrillation, and just treat it as gospel.
I mean, it's a computer measuring milliseconds. It doesn't get tired, doesn't get distracted. Logic suggests it should be right.
Yeah, but logic would be wrong. We have a study that looked at the diagnostic accuracy of atrial fibrillation. They compared the computer's interpretation against a cardiologist's overread.
How bad was it?
The computer had a 39% error rate,
Nearly 40%. That's barely better than a coin flip.
and it cuts both ways. The false negatives are the really scary ones. The machine missed the diagnosis 19% of the time.
So the patient has AFib, which causes blood clots, but the machine says normal sinus rhythm.
Exactly. So the patient doesn't get treated, and they could have a stroke.
And the false positives?
11% of the time. The machine said AFib, but the patient was fine. If you treat that based on the machine alone, you might put a patient on potent blood thinners. Now you've increased their risk of a brain bleed for absolutely no benefit.
Why is the algorithm so bad at this specific rhythm?
It struggles with irregularity, and it gets confused by other inputs. The study mentioned that tachycardia, so just a fast heart rate or pacemakers, really throw these algorithms off. A pacemaker spike can look like a heartbeat to a computer, or it could be invisible if the settings aren't right.
So the takeaway is trust but verify.
No, the takeaway is do not trust, verify. You absolutely need the human overread. You cannot let the algorithm practice medicine.
This leads us to the final and perhaps most stressful part of this whole ecosystem. If the machine is unreliable and the communication is tricky, how do you prove you did the right thing? We need to talk about documentation.
If you didn't chart it, it didn't happen.
It's the oldest cliche in healthcare.
But cliches are cliches because they are true. We have data here from NSO, the malpractice insurance provider. They found that 9.1% of nurse malpractice claims are directly due to documentation errors.
That is nearly 1 in 10 lawsuits. That is huge. So I want to pose a very specific scenario to you. This is something that I know keeps people up at night.
Go for it.
Let's say I'm a nurse. It's a chaotic shift. Alarm fatigue is set in.
Yeah.
I deal with the patient. Everything is fine, but I forget to write it down. I realize 3 hours later, oh my God, I didn't chart that event. The instinct is to panic.
Right.
How do I handle that without looking like I'm cooking the books?
This is the million-dollar question. The panic instinct is to go back into the electronic record and try to squeeze the note in as if you wrote it at the time it happened.
You mean back timing it?
Do not do that, ever.
Why? If it's accurate to the event.
Because electronic health records are forensic tools. They have audit trails. They track every single keystroke, every deletion, and every timestamp. If a lawyer subpoenas that record, they will see that at 1:00 p.m. you wrote a note and tried to timestamp it for 10:00 a.m.
And suddenly you look deceptive.
Even if you were telling the truth, you look like a liar. It just destroys your credibility.
So what is the protocol? How do you save yourself?
You use the late entry format. You chart the information as soon as you realize the omission. You let the computer record the current time, say 13:000, but in the text of the note, you clearly write late entry. At 10:00 a.m., patient noted to be in.
So you own the delay.
You own it completely.
Hmm.
Defensive documentation, as the NSO article calls it, isn't about hiding. It's about rigorous accuracy.
What about closing that loop we talked about earlier? If the tech calls me, do I need to chart that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That is your shield. If the tech logs notified Nurse Jones of VTAG at 14:00 and your chart is blank at 14:00, well, that looks like failure to rescue. That looks like negligence.
So I need to write notified by tech.
Be specific. Notified by tech of rhythm change. Assessed patient. Patient resting comfortably. No distress. Rhythm verified as artifact. Or, crucially, if you call the doctor, Dr. Smith notified at 14:00.
That specific timestamp is the defense.
It shifts the burden. You did your job, you assessed, and you notified. If the doctor chooses not to act, that's on them. But if you don't chart the notification, the assumption in court is that you never made the call.
It really highlights how telemetry isn't just about watching a squiggly line. It's this complex web of physics, psychology, communication, and law.
It really is. And when you step back and look at all these sources together, the alarms, the error rates, the tech, raises a really provocative question about the future of hospitals.
What's that?
We keep adding more technology, more sensitive monitors, more AI, more alerts. But are we reaching a tipping point where we're actually making the hospital less safe?
Because we are drowning the clinicians in data they can't trust.
Exactly. If we tech up the environment to the point where the human brain just shuts down to survive the noise, we have completely defeated the purpose of the tools. The challenge for the next decade isn't just building smarter machines, it's building machines that understand how humans actually work.
That is a thought that I think will stick with a lot of our listeners. We might be teching ourselves into a corner.
We might be.
Well, that is about all the time we have for today's deep dive. For those of you who are in the trenches of telemetry and want a quick reference guide, we found a great resource. You can pick up an EKG survival kit. We've put a link in the description to help clear up misunderstandings in your telemetry career.
It's a great tool to keep in your pocket when the monitors start screening and you need to separate the noise from the signal.
Absolutely. And a reminder to follow us and find all our episodes on Spotify podcasts.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Stay curious and double-check those strips.
See you next time.